Good morning to you all, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar hosted by the Department of Social Work and Criminology at the University of Pretoria in the Faculty of Humanities. My name is Priscilla, and I'm going to be your host this mid-morning, together with my co-organizer, Mrs. Rima Nanlau, and our technical expert today, Mrs. Elmine Claessens. Let me start by saying that the session is being recorded. If there's anyone with any objection, kindly please let us know. Also, take note that we are streaming live on our Facebook page. You can go and like our page. It's named Department of Social Work and Criminology, University of Pretoria. So let me start by taking this opportunity to acknowledge our head of department, Professor Antoinette Lombard, who's amongst us today, for supporting us and allowing us to host this webinar today. Colleagues, welcome. We've got social workers in our midst, we've got criminologists, we've got students, we've got practitioners, and we've got colleagues even from different universities that are present today. So thank you so much for joining us. For just logistical arrangements, please make sure that your mics are muted, and when we get to the question and answer section, you can raise your hand and we'll give you the opportunity to speak. And you can also even comment in the chat section. As you can see, there is a poll that is running. We would like you to cast your vote for this. We just want to know your opinion and your views when we start our webinar today. So thank you for joining us. So let's get this started. Our webinar is titled Cyber Violence Against Women, the COVID-19 Impact, which is falling under the International Cybersecurity Month. So let me invite at this juncture Elmine to tell us more about this and give us a word of welcome. Elmine, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Katura. It is my privilege to also welcome every attendee. A special word of welcome to our own head of department, Professor Lombard, our guest speakers who will be introduced to you shortly, as well as colleagues from both our department, other departments of universities across our country, as well as colleagues and students from our department. So International Cyber Security Month dates back to 2004, when the world began to notice that cybersecurity was becoming a huge concern. More people used the internet, and the risk and breaches in security became evident. And roughly 10 years ago, when the internet became a public space, unfortunately, hackers also started to get involved, and cybersecurity became a great issue. It was with this in mind that Cybersecurity Awareness Month was established to help foster attention for this issue that became a critical part of everyone's daily lives. Um, the National Cyber Security Association helped to take steps to raise awareness around this issue. If we fast track to 2021, and in the current ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, continuing restrictions that increases our reliance on the internet and the widespread use of social media, cyber violence became more pervasive than ever before. So as offline and online worlds become more connected, women are more exposed to the risk of violence, and therefore this webinar aims to increase the awareness and stimulate debate on cyber violence, particularly cyber violence against women. So the emphasis today is on cyber violence against women, but in no way do we disregard that cyber violence is affecting both men and women. Today's webinar will focus on a case study from Malawi on countering cyber violence against women amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, very relevant. And then our other guest speaker will speak on non-consensual sexting and online victimization of adolescent girls, also very appropriate. So times have changed, and indeed webinars are becoming part of our daily lives. And it is in this cyberspace today, in this webinar, that we are able to join from different places, including our homes, offices, and even public spaces. So now we invite you to sit back, enjoy our guest speakers, and please feel free to engage in a question and answer session after each speaker. And I hope that today's webinar will not be the only one, and we will break ground for many more webinars to come. Enjoy.
Thank you, Elmine, for that welcome message to everyone who's gathered here today. So without wasting any time, let me invite Ms. Rima Nanlau to introduce the first presenter of today. Over to you, Ms. Nanlau.
Thank you, Dr. Gatura. Good morning, and my name is Rima, and I have the privilege of introducing our speakers today. First, we have Mr. Donald Flywell Malanga, and Mr. Malanga is a professional librarian with 8 years of work experience in the academic environment. He works as a librarian at the University of Livingstonia in Malawi. Mr. Malanga holds a master's degree in library and information science from the University of Botswana and bachelor's degree in library and information science from Mazuso University, which is in Malawi. Mr. Malanga's research interest is in the areas of information and communication technology for development, information systems, digital media, cyber violence, and librarianship. He has participated in various local and international fellowships, conferences, and workshops on internet governance, ITC policy, and digital rights and inclusion, online misinformation, cybersecurity, digital piracy, and personal data protection. He is a fellow of Communication Policy Research for Global South and African School on International Governance. In August 2020, he was awarded a second-year fellowship by the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization to pursue a Master of Philosophy in Intellectual Property at Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Ghana. Please forgive my pronunciation. Mr. Malanga is also a PhD student in information systems at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. So Mr. Malanga is quite knowledgeable in our topic today, and he will be presenting on countering cyber violence against women amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, a case of Malawi. So take it away, Mr. Malanga.
Yeah. Yes, hello everybody. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. You can go ahead
Thank
with your
you so
presentation.
much. Thank you so much. As already introduced by the presenter, by the moderator, I'm very privileged to be part of this webinar. Basically, my presentation, as already alluded to, is about cyber violence against women amidst the COVID-19 pandemic in Malawi. You know, COVID-19 pandemic has affected affected all parts of the world, and women in particular have been affected directly and indirectly. So if we consider cyber violence, it has now become also a global phenomenon, especially on the online space or digital space. So basically, when we talk of cyber violence, basically it means any online violence or gender-based violence against women that occur in the digital space. So one could use different kind of ICT tools. For example, could be mobile phones. It could be social media, Facebooks and other maybe WhatsApp, all types of social media we have, and many other digital platforms. So next, the presenter, can you, the moderator, can you, yeah, correct, thank you. So that's a part of the introduction about cyber violence. So this is the outline we'll fall through. And as I told you, we are looking at cyber violence against women. Basically, the ICT space is supposed to be the place where women can empower themselves. But unfortunately, the same ICT tools have become weapons against them, and that have got a damaging impact on their social, economic, psychological, and even their physical condition if these ICT are left unchecked. Next. Yes, so recently studies indicate that almost 73% of women have endured cyber violence in their lifetime, and women aged between 18 to 24 that have experienced some form of cyber violence, and also very much prevalent in Europe. Recently, we have also seen rising of cyber violence against women in Africa, particularly in Kenya and South Africa. So it has become indeed a phenomenon, a global phenomenon that needs a multi-stakeholder collaboration to counter such aggression. But when it comes to studies, you see most of the studies, empirical studies, are focused much on maybe in developed countries, maybe with little attention in developing countries like Malawi and other least developed countries. But when it comes to research, you find that it's the most unreported human rights violation that we see happening on the digital space. And yet there are studies when it comes to gender-based violence against cyber violence against women. There's a deficient lack of the deficient of studies, the opposite of studies on this area. So we need more studies, because if you look at even donors or funders when it comes to funding gender-based violence issues, they are more focusing on the violence that happens in the physical space or on offline context. But very few funding is happening on the digital space to say, okay, sometimes much of this physical violence that we experience against women, for example, battering or whatever, sexual violence, maybe they originate from the online space. But you see global support or efforts that are more focusing on the physical space with little emphasis on the digital space. So you can see that there's knowledge gap that need to be filled in this area. Next. So in order to find out what should happen here to conduct the study, I tried just to look at 4 questions. Research question: what kind of violence behavior that women maybe have experienced during COVID-19 pandemic or are experiencing? What are the perpetrators' motivation? What are the attackers' motivation? Why do they commit such cyber violence against women? What are the impacts? And maybe what could be the possible strategies or responses that could help to combat this aggression? So these are the key 4 research questions that the study intended to achieve. Yes, so to do that, we used a theoretical framework. This framework was conceptualized or postulated by International Center for Research on Women in 2018. So when you look at whether it's your right side or your left side, but your right side, I hope, it has 2 areas where you have the perpetrator side or the attacker and the victim side. So on the perpetrator side, you'll find that you have 3 variables there. You have the motivation. The motivation is like what motivates the perpetrators to conduct cyber violence. So it could be because of revenge, maybe because of jealousy or anger, with the intention or the intent is to make maybe to psychologically harm the victims, or to physically harm, or maybe the attacker or the perpetrator want to advance a certain norm enforcement, to advance a particular norm behavior. So after the perpetrator has developed such kind of motivation, then they go now ahead to perform their the cyber violent behaviors, which could be in the form of stalking, defamation, or online bullying, or cyber bullying, or mobile bullying, could be exploitation, or some kind of online hate speech. There are different forms of cyber violent behaviors that these perpetrators can do. Then below that, there is issues of the frequency. How frequently do they do this behavior? How frequently do they conduct these behaviors? And they use which mode? Which mode do they use? Do they use social media? WhatsApp, for example? Do they use emails? Do they use dating sites? So we are looking at the digital platform that they use to commit these cyber violent behaviors. And they also use different tactics. It could be doxing, maybe using some kind of threats. Then you have the other side where you have the victim or survivor. This is where you look at now the impact, which could be physical, psychological, social, economic. If it is your student, it could have even academic impact, all right? And there's also some helping or social help-seeking coping behaviors. So you could use some kind of maybe support services, which could be social support services, legal support services, and many other coping mechanisms that can be used. So this is what, in brief, this model theory is trying to understand, to expound about the cyber violence in the cyber violence against women. So we conducted this study, and it was basically a survey. We surveyed almost 67 women, and we targeted 3 districts. It was just a random. We targeted women who have maybe access to technology like mobile phones. So we conducted, and it was overwhelming. The result was very encouraging, and these are the key findings that I can present to you. We looked at forms of cyber violence. We looked at the perpetrators' motivation, what are the impacts, and possibly what are the strategies that can be used to counter such violence. So in terms of violence, cyber violent behaviors, you can see from the screen, much of the women experienced cyber harassment, bullying was rampant, cyber stalking, with some online sexual exploitation. So that's what the women experienced, and basically the perpetrators used smartphones, social medias, and some fake email accounts. So that's what they could use to commit this violence. When it comes to motivation, what was the motivation for these perpetrators to conduct such violence? Basically, it was found that it was kind of revenge, and maybe some because of anger, or they want to advance a particular ideology, or because of jealousy. So there were so many issues why these perpetrators conducted such violent behaviors, the motivation behind. Then when it comes to the impacts, the studies show that women and girls in particular experience some negative impacts in terms of social, economic impacts, psychological or emotional, and there was also some kind of physical impact. So for instance, when it comes to social impact, some women, they said they withdraw from online activity because they didn't see any protection. So the best way was to withdraw from participating in digital space. You see? In terms of psychological impact or emotional, some felt, they say, they were living in fear, they were depressed, they thought maybe their image had been damaged. So there were all sorts of responses. Some even economically, they suffered economically, because you can imagine if you are exposed at a workplace, or maybe you want to find a new job because of the embarrassment you are going through, maybe where you are applying a job, people have heard what has happened, you feel bad about it. So these were some of the negative effects, negative impact that cyber violence contributed to. So in terms of strategies to counter such violence, it was really discouraging to see. We expect internet to be, digital space to be a freedom, a space for participation without any compromise, without any fear. But we found that most women, they used things like blocking the attackers, leaving the digital platform, even if when they report to police, but you find that maybe the police didn't take any action. In our African culture, I don't know in South Africa and other countries, for example in Malawi, you find that when you complain issues about online, people don't take you serious. You say, why don't you just stop or block him? So they don't know culturally, when something you say you are complaining about the violence you are experiencing on digital space, it's not taken seriously, you see. So even when some of them, because of those cultural understanding, they never bothered to report to police. They even asking about even the intervention of digital platform owners. So because of some cultural, they never bothered to do that. So these are some of the key findings that the study found. And in conclusion, you can see that it was found that indeed in the country, cyber violence against women is increasing. And you see, these findings had a potential contribution to what we call ICT for social justice. You know, information and communication technology has got a lot to promote, to play in contributing to social justice, you know. But in this case, we are able to understand that instead of the same ICT providing, you know, social space for women to express themselves, the same ICT space is becoming a weapon against the same women, you know. So in view of this, we thought that maybe government and other stakeholders should advocate for awareness raising campaign about cyber violence, and even online digital platforms should respond quickly to victims of online abuse. Yeah, we have seen these things happening to Twitter or Facebook. Sometimes when they see some kind of cyber violence happening, they will remove you. So there are so many strategies that are trying to use. Even the legal enforcement agency also need to be proactive. We also need to maybe to strengthen our policy. Maybe our policies that we have, they are not well focused on cyber violence. They are more focusing on the physical space. So, in short, this is what the study looked about, and I have the full paper for this document, for this presentation. I hope at the end of the presentation, I will share with the link where you can read the full document, and if there are questions or comments, you can ask. At this juncture, I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malanga, for your presentation, and thank you for enlightening us about cyber violence. As you were presenting, I actually thought to myself, yes, we talk about gender-based violence against women, but there's nothing much that is being said when it comes to cyber violence. And you have actually confirmed what we had asked in the poll. We asked the question, are you of the opinion that cyber violence is a current issue that deserves attention? And the results from the voting shows that 99% of our participants today said yes, and only 1% said that they are unsure. So you have confirmed to us that this is indeed a critical issue that needs attention. I would like to open the floor now for any questions, comments, anything that you want to say with regards to the presentation that has been made. So if you have anything that you want to say, you can raise your hand, and you can also put the question in the chat section. So I'm opening the floor now for questions. Yes, Miss Rima, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Malanga, for your presentation. And I do agree with Dr. Gatura about the prevalence of cyber violence and the fact that we don't really consider doing research on cyber violence against women or against anyone for that matter. So as a researcher, especially focusing on gender-based violence, what would you suggest that we as researchers focus on in terms of cyber violence? What, as you have done this study, you would be more suitable to help us to look at other fields or other aspects with regard to cyber violence when we are conducting our research. So what would you suggest that we focus on when we're looking at cyber violence?
Thank you so much, Rima. That's a very good question. You see, cyber violence is complex, very complex. It has so many dimensions. For example, if you go in universities or higher education colleges, you see that what is more rampant there is more like mobile bullying as an aspect of cyber violence, you see. So, for example, if you want to target on maybe on a higher education or colleges, universities, or maybe on schools, to me, you may align a particular study, maybe focusing on maybe cyber, sorry, on maybe mobile bullying, which is more common, all right, more prevalent. Or if you go to women, maybe even women, you have different. Some people, women with disabilities, you can also focus on maybe online sexual exploitation or online hate. So it has so many subfields that you can focus on. Because when we talk of cyber violence, it's just it's a big thing with so many elements there. So currently, I would suggest that in most countries, we are lacking what we call aggregated studies that really categorize to say, when you talk of cyber violence, how is the data aggregated when it comes to maybe based on gender, based on age, based on maybe women in terms of their vulnerabilities, maybe women maybe with disabilities, how is the prevalence looks like. So it comes to research, it's a complex issue which require at least multi-stakeholder approaches. There's no single way, no single method you can use to highlight all issues. So I would suggest to look at it in a broader perspective while focusing on the local context. At the same time, maybe even at policy level, we need to engage the civil society, maybe to review, to try kind of maybe advocacy, kind of to lobby for revision of our policies. Most of our policies are not aligned with cyberspace. Yes, people are talking about data protection, people are talking about cyber security, but when I read these policies, I see a lot of gaps that need to be rectified. So we need to engage the civil society, the policymakers in the public sector, and try to work as a team so that we are able to rectify this space, and even mobilizing more resources on the digital space, because most of the studies, most of the even gender, funders, they are more focusing on the physical space. So you can see these gaps are still not covered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malanga, for answering that question. And indeed, we need to do more research when it comes to cyber violence. Is there anyone else who's got a question or any comment now that we've been enlightened that cyber violence is actually occurring? Is there anyone with any comment or any question? Yes, Elmine, you can go ahead.
Mr. Milanga, I'm interested to find out from your study if there were any link between the relationship of the perpetrator towards the victim. Was it people that they knew? Was it only strangers? So just for interesting sake, I would like to know the relationship from your study.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will read the full paper. I think I'll provide a link. Yes. when it came to the finding, it was really clear that there was a relationship. Most of the victims, women, complained that they were known. Some of them, they were maybe, for example, co-workers. Okay, maybe some complaints, so maybe these people were more like ex-husbands or ex-boyfriends, you see. So the study found that most of the relationships that exist, most of the people the perpetrators, I would say, they were known to the victims. Only a few said that they were just strangers, but in general terms, studies showed that the relationship or the perpetrators, I would say, they were known to the what? To the victims. So there was that kind of relationship existed before, and in terms of maybe ex-husband or co-workers. Yeah, so in short, I would say that's what the study found. Sure.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Malanga. Very interesting. Thank you, and very insightful. Thank you.
Maybe just to add, like, let me use one example that this one was a college student. So this college student, they broke out with her ex-boyfriend. So they could share these WhatsApp images. They are on the lake side. They're enjoying whatever they want. So when the man heard that, okay, the woman, the girlfriend has left him, so he had to take all the pictures, the nudes, the images, and throw them into into WhatsApp groups and start sharing. So it was so embarrassing. So you could see that it was really confirming that this victim knew the attacker. There was a relationship between her and the perpetrator or the attacker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malanga. Is there anyone with any question or any comment that they want to make before we can move to the second presenter? If there's anyone who wants to say something. Okay, I'm sure we are still putting this into our mind that it is really happening. Okay, I can see another hand. There is Witness Maduleke. Please go ahead.
Hello, Ma. Thanks. I have populated my questions via the chat room. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let me just check in the chat the questions that are there. Elmin, can you please help me?
No,
to read
Dr.
out the
Katuria,
questions?
Dr. Katura, I don't see it in the chat, so maybe we can just ask Witness to just give it via the microphone, because we don't see it in the chat, Mr. Maluleke.
Okay, no problem, Prof. No, I just wanted to learn from the presenter how accessible are the statistics of this practice in his country. And lastly, the issue of the said practices in rural areas, how common are those? And then how are the related responses to that effect? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, sir. I'm humbled for the question. I would say this study was just, I would say it was just done in just three districts, and mostly we focused on, on the townships, on 3 townships in 3 districts. So I would not say that these results are really capped in the whole country. No, it was just more like a pilot study. So there's need more study, so that more study need to be replicated, so that you can have a comprehensive generalization about the findings. So they need more research. Indeed, currently this study only focused on township, and there's no any way I can link to say maybe establishing a link between maybe the cyber violence against women between, maybe if you compare the urban and the rural. No. Those are areas for further research that we need to do. So this was just a pilot study, just to give us a general view about cyber violence. So I would suggest they need more research, because I would consider this was just a pilot study. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Malanga, for answering that question. I think indeed we need to have more research, even in South Africa and other countries as well, so that we can be able to get the extent to which cyber violence is happening. So thank you for your presentation, and thank you everyone who asked their questions and who have also commented. If you've got anything else that you want to comment, maybe it will come as the webinar is going, you can put in the chat. And Mr. Malanga has actually told us that there is a full paper which has got all the information and all the findings, and you share with us the link so that we can be able to share with everyone if you want to read further on the study. So, okay, I think there is one last question that we can accommodate. I see a hand that is up. Can you please go ahead? I think it was Vuyelwa. Okay, maybe it was just by mistake. Vuyelwa, do you want to say something?
No, it was a mistake. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Vuyelwa.
Thank you.
Now I would like to ask Rima to please introduce our second presenter.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry, do you guys have an echo? Okay.
Yes, there is an echo, but you can go ahead. Let's see how it goes.
Okay, just give. Sorry about that. Okay, so our next speaker is Dr. Tara Harris. And Dr. Tara Harris has worked within the field of criminology and education for the past 12 years. She obtained her BPhil in 2020 in her thesis, Gender Differences in Adolescent Sexting Towards a Policy Framework for Secondary Schools. She investigated the gendered nature of adolescent sexting in order to develop a sexting policy or a sexting policy framework for secondary schools in South Africa. She analyzed the normalcy and deviancy discourses of adolescent sexting and argued the necessity of including the gendered nature and other complexities of the adolescent sexting when attempting to safeguard adolescents who are part of the technological revolution, which embodies digital sexual cultures. She has spoken on the topics of adolescent sexting, the culture of violence in South Africa, and cyberbullying and the negative repercussions on radio. Dr. Harris's research areas focus on gender, youth crime, and online victimization. She's also the associate editor for Acta Criminologica, and is a peer-reviewed author. Today, Dr. Harris is going to present on non-consensual sexting and online victimization of adolescent girls. We are really excited to listen to you, Dr. Harris, and you may now go ahead with your presentation.
Good morning. If somebody could just give me a heads up if you can hear me and I'm not too soft.
We can hear you. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you very much for the introduction. As Ms. Nunwald said, I'm presenting on the non-consensual aspect of sexting because that speaks to the online victimization. What was interesting for me when I conducted the study was that there appears to be a sort of head in the sand approach. And I think this is prevalent across all areas of adolescence, really, when we start to talk about their sexuality. It makes people uncomfortable. We don't want to know that this is what adolescents are doing, that there's naked photos going around, and that this is how, in a technological era, they are in fact forging their sexual identities and engaging in intimate relationships. But the fact of the matter is that adolescence is a period in which sexual development takes place. So it's natural that if we move into this digital realm, and with the speed at which technology advances, that adolescents wouldn't be immune to the impact of the internet and of cyberspace in their lives, and of course in their sexual development, and of course within their own identity formation. So just to give you a very brief overview, we'll just have an introduction in terms of adolescent sexting and online victimization. I'm going to give you a very brief discussion or description of the study that I conducted, one element of the study I conducted, and then of course what it all means for us. And then there is an element that speaks specifically to COVID-19 and how COVID-19 has impacted adolescent relationships. So when we look at adolescence in itself, obviously it's a developmental phase. And within the advent of technology, there is social media. And what was interesting for me, and what I found a lot even since the study was conducted, was that adolescents, generally speaking, are moving away from the Facebook area, and they're moving into apps such as TikTok and Instagram, and apps like Snapchat that allow things to be deleted. So Facebook is a little bit different in that you have to go in and delete the post, whereas for something like Snapchat, it can be set that it is automatically deleted in terms of a photo. However, there are areas where obviously you can screenshot that photo, so as much as it's been deleted in inverted commas, it's actually not gone. And this is one of the issues with cyberspace, is that anything that's posted, actually there is a record of it somewhere. To get rid of it in its entirety is very difficult. Adolescents are, of course, at the cutting edge in terms of our information and communication technology space. Honestly, I think that little people are now born with the capability of working a smartphone. I know even with my own kids that they'll take my smartphone and they can get into an app and they can download games and things. They've worked out things on my phone that I don't know how they work. So I think we need to take this into account, because we cannot police online activity of adolescents to a degree that they are not then in a space that they can make use of it responsibly, because we have to use it. We're using it today, and of course COVID-19 has made it that much more prevalent in terms of how wonderful and how useful the internet can be, and how cyberspace can allow for these types of webinars to continue. But young people do need to know how to use it correctly. What is important is that when we look at adolescent sexting, and therefore because sexting can lead to online victimization, we need to know, and adolescents need to know, that sexting in South Africa is classified as child pornography. So sending a picture would be the distribution of that child pornography. If you save the picture on your phone, it would obviously be a situation of having child pornography. And if you were to send that in a non-consensual way after the fact, it would then be dissemination. So there are legal ramifications, and this is all incorporated into the Sexual Offences Act. Very often adolescents don't think about what they post. So it's fun, and they don't necessarily recognize the detrimental side, in the sense that they can't delete it. And of course, because they're online a lot, We have a space where they are exposed to sexually explicit content, both in terms of what they search, but also what may be sent to them. And of course, they can now, with smartphones in particular, create their own sexually explicit content. So just very quickly for a definition, sexting for my study particularly referred to the sending, receiving and or forwarding of nude or sexually suggestive imagery that did include videos across social media platforms. So it covered the whole aspect in terms of sending it or receiving it, or in fact then forwarding it in terms of dissemination. It's also important to note that online victimization and adolescent sexting is all to do with the access that younger people have to technology. And this concept of screens sometimes being babysitters for younger people, you know, when parents are busy and working, and of course in COVID-19, with parents having to work at home, very often it was easier simply to say to a teenager or even a younger child, you know, turn the TV on, go on your tablet, go on the phone, that type of thing. I did just want to highlight that there were two, well, I've only mentioned two, but they are newspaper headings which show us both the perpetration and the victimization that comes about with online victimization and sexting in particular. So the first one was Sexting Surprise, Teens Face Child Porn Charges. This is a lot more prevalent in America, where children are both charged but also found guilty of being in possession or disseminating child pornography. And the second one was in fact from this year, and I'm sure that you guys will remember this, but it was the Limpopo student who committed suicide after a video of a bullying situation at her school went viral. And she's not the first South African, and she's certainly not the first adolescent in a global space who's committed suicide after a sexting incident or a bullying incident where they just felt that they couldn't cope in terms of the bullying that they were experiencing. Sorry, just waiting for the slide to load. Okay, so if we just look at some statistics, it's incredibly difficult to get statistics on South Africa in particular in terms of how much we're online, what are our kind of statistics around adolescent sexting. But in terms of cyberbullying, there have been studies done, and South Africa actually consistently ranks within the top 5 of countries globally in terms of cyberbullying. And there was a particular study that indicated that roughly 24% of South African teens had been cyberbullied. And from that space, in terms of a suicide rate of adolescents, South Africa actually ranks 4th in the world. And that is after New Zealand, America, and if I remember correctly, the Philippines. So this really does have serious ramifications because it's affecting the mental health of our adolescents in terms of the online victimization that they're experiencing. And therefore, we're having increased unnatural deaths of adolescents in this country. In terms of sexting, global studies show that it occurs frequently, and more recent studies have showed that it's in fact on the rise. Generally speaking, the initial studies that were done on adolescent sexting looked specifically at the prevalence. So in terms of that, those studies most of the studies started sort of 2008, 2009. And from then until my study, or this part of my study was done, which was 2015, 2016, there was a sexting range of between 4 to 20%. And what was very interesting was that those studies didn't actually show that sexting varies across sex or gender, but it does show that it varies across age, with older adolescents engaging more in sexting. And that's quite an important point when I get to the brief overview of my own study, but I'll come back to that. I also just wanted to highlight in this particular space that adolescents are a very vulnerable population because of the amount of time that they spend online. 45% of American adolescents have actually indicated that they are almost constantly online. In other words, they constantly have their phones in their hands. And South African statistics show us that on average, South Africans spend up to 8 hours of a day online, which is huge. and more than 50% of those 8 hours is on social media. So it's not that we're all working online, we're actually on social media. In terms of boys and girls, if we look at the gendered nature, they do spend an equal amount of time online, but what they do online is different. So girls actually engage more socially in terms of chat room and across social media platforms like TikTok, Instagram, the posting of photos, filtering their photos, all of that type of thing. Whereas boys actually engage more in things like gaming. And therefore, it's not actually surprising that we would see a difference in online victimization because it's based on the activities in which they engage. So for my study specifically, sorry, I see the bottom of that slide's cut off, but for my study specifically, I actually had 3 strands, but the one that I'm going to report on today, and you'll see that underneath my method here, I've actually said to you that the expectancies, which is what the adolescents' expectations of sexting were, has been removed for the purposes of this particular presentation. So the first quantitative strand of my study is what I'm reporting on, and the aim was to look at sexting behavior, but also at online victimization specifically. I made use of a cross-sectional survey design. Disappointingly, there were only 83 of the plus minus 800 respondents that I could have had that participated. But there were reasons for this. So firstly, as I mentioned in my introduction, there's the head in the sand kind of approach from schools in particular, that they don't actually want to deal with this necessarily or to engage in the fact that it does happen in their schools. And there were issues of consent and assent. Because I was working with children under the age of 18, I needed parental consent. So the children or the adolescents themselves were responsible for taking those letters home to be signed. And a suggestion which could be made is that they actually didn't want to draw their parents' attention to what might be going on in terms of their social media platforms or across their phones, and therefore they just simply didn't ask for consent. I also think that they don't necessarily recognize the value of this type of research. Many adolescents are aware of the legal ramifications and even the negative consequences of sexting, and yet they engage in it anyway. So there were issues around assent as well, for those adolescents actually to assent to the research themselves. The method, or the data collection instrument rather, was a self-administered questionnaire. It focused on biographic information. It looked specifically at internet usage, and we did use a validated scale, which was adapted. It was called the Online Victimization Scale. It was adapted simply to address the South African vernacular. So, for example, in America, they might talk about making out. It's not a phrase that South African youth use. In America, they may refer to flirting, for example. In South Africa, at the time when the study was conducted, the term for flirting was macking. So we adapted it so that our adolescents actually knew what we were asking. And even with that adaptation, there was an internal reliability score that was above the 0.7. So the particular Cronbach alpha was in fact 0.837. So it was above what we would have expected at a minimum. Also, just to let you know that in terms of the results that I'm going to present to you, it look at effect sizes. So if there was a significant difference that came up, we did look at effect sizes, and obviously a minus 0.1 was a weak effect, minus 0.3 was a medium effect, and of course anything above minus 0.5 would give us a strong effect size. I'm sorry, I see it's cut off here as well, which is disappointing. But just very quickly in terms of sort of the demographical things, and this is the particular part here is the importance of the age, because as I mentioned earlier, sexting behavior in particular increases with advanced adolescent development. So the fact that our mean age was in fact less than 15 indicates that we may have been working with a population that hadn't yet got to the point of that sexual exploration across a digital media space. We did actually have, interestingly enough, a categoric split of 50% male and female. 2/3 of the respondents were in grade 8 or grade 9. Most of them spoke English, and we only had middle to high income respondents. But that was also because of the space in which we were conducting the research, being private schools. And of course, if you see that nearly 86% of those respondents had internet on their cell phones, we can see how easy it is for them to gain access without necessarily being regulated in any way. So the scale looked at the online victimization, specifically in terms of when negative things said. Was there anything that was posted that was mean or rude? Were they harassed for no apparent reason, i.e. they posted a photo that was a perfectly normal photo and they were trolled for it? Were they harassed because something specific had happened? So for example, maybe there was a sexting incident and then people online were bullying them for that. Were they humiliated or embarrassed? And you can see that we had nearly all of them at a medium-size effect in terms of the differentiation between male and female adolescents. So we can already see just by looking at this table that females were in fact victimized more in an online space. There were other questions that were asked around being bullied or threatened, and we can see that being bullied, so cyberbullying seems to affect girls more than boys. And one of the reasons for this, and this happens in a traditional bullying space as well, boys generally engage in the physical aspect of bullying. So they'll beat each other up, for example, or they'll steal lunch, you know, the physical aspect of it. Whereas girls generally use mean words and spread rumors and things like that. So that literally translates from a traditional bullying space into a cyberbullying space. The other one that showed an effect size was even after they had been asked to engage in some type of sexual interplay on the internet, and they had asked specifically that engagement stop. There was a continuation in terms of requests for either unwanted cyber sex or photographs or videos, that type of thing. And this, as you can see by that effect size, occurred more with girls than with boys. Both boys and girls actually reported that there had been rumors about their sexual behavior, but interestingly enough, in follow-up discussions, it was a lot more negative for girls than it was for boys. But I think this also speaks to the general double standards that we have around female sexuality. So there's, and it's been around, it's a pervasive attitude that boys, you know, will sort of spread their wild oats, so to speak, whereas girls need to remain in a virginal and pure space. So that's also, again, in a cyber space, it's very much a translation from ordinary attitudes around female sexuality in what is not a virtual space, but in a real space. You can also see that there was a medium effect difference in terms of the fact that girls were asked more than boys to send sexy pictures or photographs of themselves. This one around being shown unwanted sexy pictures or photographs was also interesting because it highlights the fact that these pictures are disseminated in an unconsensual way or an unconsensual way. Both boys and girls had received images that they didn't necessarily want, and again it highlights that non-consensual dissemination. But what was incredibly interesting here was that boys appeared to report their unwanted attention more than girls. And again, one of the reasons for this could be that girls are embarrassed. They fear that they may get into trouble for having engaged in sexting behavior to begin with. Also, I think when it comes to the cyberbullying space, what we see is that because it's only words, and girls experience this online victimization more, even in terms of cyberbullying, because it's only words in inverted commas, they sort of feel like they should be able to deal with it themselves. They don't necessarily want to worry their parents, particularly if they're being bullied over an image that they posted. again, it might be, well, why have you posted that image? So we sort of sit in a space where there's still, particularly if it's even a photo in a bikini, that there is still very definitely victim blaming and to a degree slut shaming happening in this space. The next slide to adolescents who had received a sext, and what we can see here is that generally speaking, and again I think this speaks to the age group, both males and females had a higher prevalence of not having received a sext. Males had received more, and this might also be linked to peer pressure and to pressurized sexting. So we differentiate between consensual sexting, which is, yes, sure, here I have a picture, non-consensual, which can relate to things like revenge porn, for example, and then we have this space of pressurized sexting. So it's not consensual, but it's not non-consensual, but you've been pressured into doing it. So in terms of receiving a sext, males may have received more sext, either through the non-consensual dissemination of sex that a friend has or something similar, or it could be that they had pressured girls to send pictures of themselves. This is how many of them actually intersext, and we can see that females and males, again, we have a higher prevalence of never, but I would suggest that this really does refer to the age. Girls seem to have sent less sex than boys, but again, boys sext for different reasons. So they think it's funny, it's a joke, etc., whereas girls very often sext out of peer pressure, or wanting to be accepted, or thinking that if they send the picture, that they may be in a space to forge a relationship. What does it all mean? What it shows us in terms of these results is that girls spend more time using their mobile phones, as I previously said, and therefore we could say that girls are more at risk of being cyberbullied than their male counterparts. And the reason for this is that sexting forms such a huge part of cyberbullying. And sexting doesn't have to be a completely nude, full frontal. It could be a very sexy position, even if you're in a bikini and not in your underwear, for example. So those types of photos open girls up to be trolled. There's body shaming that's happening, as I said, and of course the slut shaming. So that speaks to the more negative commentary that girls have. And because they're less likely to report, we also sit in a situation where the behavior goes unchecked from an online victimization space. They are also being targeted much more for sexual reasons than boys are. And they really do try and sort it out themselves or with their friends. So they don't want to draw adult attention. And again, I think this speaks back to what I said in the beginning, that we don't want to talk about adolescent sexuality, and particularly female adolescent sexuality or sexual behavior. So interestingly, boys actually have a higher prevalence of sexting in totality, but they experience less negative expectancies thereof and less negative commentary. And they also have a higher prevalence of non-consensual distribution of those sexts. So we can see from the previous slide that roughly 1 in 2 of those in the sample had received a sext, but then only 1 in 5 had sent a sext. So the maths doesn't really add up on that one. So we could maybe put that down to non-consensual distribution in terms of why there's a difference in those statistics. Okay, so when we look at cyberbullying or online victimization, what we need to do is we need to find a space that can protect females in particular, because of the negative consequences that they suffer in particular. We need to create safer avenues in terms of reporting, so that girls don't feel judged, they don't feel that they are being blamed for what is happening to them, and they recognize that there is somebody that they can speak to, and somebody who isn't going to judge, and somebody who's actually going to give them the help that they need. We also need to create a space that there's more regulated access, and it's not just in terms of when or how adolescents go onto the internet or into the virtual space. It's also about recognizing that even something as simple as apps actually create covers. So what happens in this space is that you would have a particular app that is directed at sexual engagement, but the icon on your phone would be a calculator. So what this means is that parents aren't aware of what is on their children's phones just by looking at the phone. You would have to go into that app specifically. And this then brings us to a space in and around trust and adolescent privacy, and it opens up a much, much broader debate about allowing adolescents the space in which that they need to develop, but also not exposing them to unmitigated harm and risk. In terms of sexting, we need to look at recognizing the adolescent viewpoint. When I started the study, I was very definitely in a space that, sexting shouldn't be happening. And yes, if it was just classified as child pornography, that was probably the right thing. And adolescents needed to understand that we don't send these types of photos or videos. And as the study progressed, I became more and more aware of the fact that they are growing up in an era that is completely different from what it was previously. There's a legislative lag between the types of crimes that are occurring online, and in this case, obviously, particularly online victimization or cyberbullying, and of course, sexting. So the faster technology advances and the slower the legal space is to catch up with it, the more difficulty we are going to have. And one of the end conclusions of the study was really to focus awareness on normative sexual development of adolescents, where it is a consensual space and where it's happening in terms of an intimate relationship, and being aware then that if that relationship were to end, there is an element of revenge porn that could come into that space. And the deviancy discourse. Sexual development has changed with the advent of technology. It has to have changed. So they have access to information that previous generations didn't have access to. And of course, they can now engage in this intimate space at any time of the day or night, whereas previously you obviously had to be with the person in order to engage. And I think what's also really, really important here is that we cannot have a blanket rule around how we deal with online or adolescent sexting in an online space, because you have to recognize that there is a consensual space, a non-consensual space, which is hugely damaging, and then you have a pressurized space, and that pressurized sexting is exactly the same as substance abuse. It's exactly the same as possibly being pressured into bullying, because we don't like that girl, the mean girls culture that's now moved into an online space. So I think it's necessary that we take that into account, and we recognize really that adolescents need a voice in how these particular situations are dealt with, and that they are not left to feel on their own, and that they are being judged, body shamed, slut shamed in terms of the sexting space. So very quickly then, the impact of COVID-19. What we can see is that there's been an increase in cyber dating, and obviously this was a necessitated increase because people couldn't see each other physically. There was no physical touch, but not being able to physically touch somebody didn't negate the need for intimacy or sexual exploration in an adolescent space. Lockdown for a lot of us, never mind adolescents, led to boredom, frustration. There was a lack of physical communication opportunities. And remember, with the internet and screens, the anonymity that is afforded really does protect people in terms of being able to engage in online victimization or just sexting itself. Also, there is less chance of being rejected in an online space. And if you are rejected, you can simply then resort to cyberbullying. Of course, cyberbullying means that the bully is more protected because they don't have to even face the victim at school. They don't have to face them at all. It's just simply hiding behind a screen, and there is that de-individuation which occurs. And sometimes from behind a screen, individuals behave differently from how they would if they were face-to-face with somebody. And then lastly, an impact of COVID-19 is, of course, the male friendship area, in which, you might have been in inverted commas, in the locker room and are having a chat and saying, oh yeah, well, you know, my girlfriend did this or my girlfriend did that sort of thing. And this has now moved into an online space. And of course, it's not just verbal, it's actually written down, or the photo has been disseminated. And of course, if a breakup were to occur, this is where we then enter the space of revenge porn. So yes, that was my study in a nutshell and what we found. And I think, you know, COVID-19 has really impacted adolescents, and they're losing the capability of being able to communicate face-to-face, and therefore engaging in behavior that they wouldn't necessarily engage in, specifically in an online space. But I would also just like to say thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to present at what I think is really a most important webinar in terms of recognizing in an adolescent space what technology means for them and where they are in their world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harris, for your presentation and for enlightening us, especially with regards to what is happening at the adolescent stage. As you were presenting, I think at some point you actually mentioned that some people do it because they think it's funny. I think it happens to most of us because we are on these social media platforms, and we end up saying things or doing other things thinking that they are funny, not knowing the impact that is happening to the person that we are saying those things to. And I think people hide behind the social media where you're not showing your face, so you can be able to say other things that are actually harmful to the next person. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'd like to open the floor now for any questions or any comments that the attendees have for you. So if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or you can put the question in the chat box. Okay, I can see hand. Witness Maluleke, you can go ahead.
Thank you, Ma. For me, it's just to commend the presenter for this presentation. The topic in question, indeed, it is happening, Prof, and I feel like it is time for it to make noise. I think the result again of your study, if it's possible, can be shared with the South African Police Service, because normally they distribute pamphlet to the public, but then with English language, among others. So I was thinking if it is possible to translate such findings into other African languages, that can help a lot of people. Because where I'm sitting, from rural area perspective, there are young boys now as we speak who are using Facebook to impersonate themselves as girls, and they lure money from adult males, you know. So the tables are changing. Now they are not victims, they are collecting money from adult males, and that can be a crime on itself, and that can put their life into a real danger. So I'm thinking of maybe doing such research, because many people now, they are taking that as a career route. Where I come from, they are eliciting money from adult males illegally, so by impersonating themselves via Facebook. So again, I feel like it is a very important area that can be explored. Lastly, Doc, this crime does not only target young girls and boys, even us as adults. I remember using my wife as a profile pic in my Facebook. The messages that I used to get, they are out of this world, and pictures, the images that I was getting were too much for me to see, until I had to remove the picture in question, and now I'm at peace. So I fear for them, I fear for my kids as well, as to what they are facing in their absence, or for me not to monitor them as well. So I feel it is very, very essential for this message to reach everyone, Prof. And thank you very much for this presentation.
Thank you, Witness. I think you make such a good point that at the end of the day, you know, no study is going to be able to be generalized all over. And we absolutely in South Africa need to look more in the rural spaces. And of course, there's crimes outside of online victimization, as you've mentioned, so things like sextortion. And again, I'm not sure that young people are aware of the fact that they are putting themselves at great risk in terms of crimes that they might unknowingly be committing. I mean, obviously, if you're asking for money, you know that you're doing something wrong. But in sort of just sending a photo on and saying, oh, wow, look at my girlfriend kind of thing, I don't think that they necessarily are aware of the fact that they put themselves at a risk from a legal perspective.
Okay, thank you, Tara, for that. And I can see there is another hand, Mrs. Mojela. Yes, you can go ahead.
Thank you to both presenters. I just wanted to, what do you think with regards to, I know you said that we bury our heads in the sand to say that this is actually happening amongst children or adolescents, but then in terms of because we bury our heads in the sand and it's not addressed, then do children who are then perpetrators of this cyber violence or cyberbullying then carry it into then adulthood, where then it becomes a more serious matter, and then does it then escalate when they are adults? If maybe you've read something with regards to that.
I haven't read something specifically with regards to that, but something that I could say in terms of, you know, a space in which we look at developmental pathways. There's absolutely a possibility that somebody who's engaging in it in an adolescent space may then take that further into what would in essence become online workplace violence. So it's very difficult to say, you know, bullying has been prevalent. It's been around for centuries. It's I don't know if it's part of human nature. I don't know if it's part of adolescence specifically in terms of trying to gain some type of status. I think from an adult perspective, very often bullying that takes place is more of a power play. It's more of a power relationship. So I've not found a particular study that speaks to the pathway from cyberbullying to, as I said, online victimization in adulthood. But I would suggest to you that if it's not something that is addressed, and if adolescent bullies are allowed to get away with it, and they are not sort of taught the essentials of accountability and responsibility for their online behavior, then yes, I think it is something, because adults hide behind screens the exact same way that adolescents hide behind screens.
Okay, I can see that there is another question in the chat.
Yeah, I'm just reading it.
You're reading it, okay. I think it's from Dr. Chiwara. She says that, Tara, you gave frightening statistics on the incidences and multifaceted forms of cyber violence in schools. You mentioned that you did your study in selected private schools. Are there any programs in those schools to generate conversations on cyberbullying and to offer support to victims? What recommendations would you give to the educational and other sectors in this regard?
So if we look at what's happening in schools, and I think it's more a case of private schools, obviously, because there's an element of privilege, but we do have situations in which speakers go in, they attempt to have these conversations. Obviously, there's things around network protection and firewalls and that type of things to try and prevent the dissemination of certain images, if that's what was going on. I also think, in fairness, one of the things that really needs to happen is that we need to have a space in terms of the life orientation curricula. We have life orientation as a subject to matric. It's compulsory. This is the type of thing that needs to be discussed. While I recognize the seriousness of HIV/AIDS, and I recognize the seriousness of other illnesses such as TB, the fact of the matter is that we are not dealing with contemporary issues in our life orientation curriculum. And for me personally, and it's only an opinion, while we still need to teach about sexually transmitted diseases, etc., the fact of the matter is we have to start opening more conversation with adolescents in particular around the online space. But not only that, we need to open conversation about healthy sexuality. We have a lot of adolescents that are coming out as LGBTQI++, and we need to open conversations about healthy sexuality. This idea of sexuality being taboo is really problematic, because adolescents do engage. They engage both physically and in virtual worlds, and therefore we need to have open, honest conversations. And we need to be in a space that we're really not judging adolescents, that we are just in a space that says, listen, we don't recommend, we wouldn't suggest you take a photograph of yourself. However, we also recognize that this is part of your development. And part of what my study was what it accomplished was that I have a sexting policy that differentiates between consensual and non-consensual sexting that fits into the South African legal framework, because of course that policy has to fit into the framework. You can't as a school decide what you are or aren't going to do. It has to fit into the legalities of the situation. But I do think that much more conversation needs to happen, and I also think that there needs to be, in terms of both the education and other relevant sectors, there has to be this debate about normalcy and deviance. Because the global perspective is that this is not a deviant behavior in terms of sexting. In terms of cyberbullying, yes, 100%. Again, we have to have much, much stricter regulations around what we do in those situations.
Okay, thank you so much, Tara, for that. I think we need to have more conversations. I think this year's ignited in us that we need to talk more about this, about cyber violence. We need to make sure that our children are safe, even adults, women, it happens also even to males. So now I would like to take this opportunity to invite our head of department, Professor Antoinette Lombard, to give us concluding remarks. Over to you, Professor Antoinette Lombard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kutura, and welcome to our UP colleagues and all our visitors on the platform. And thank you to our speakers, Mr. Malanga and Dr. Harris, for really breaking us open for us the realities. And yes, certainly, as we said, more research needs to be done, but just facing what we've heard this morning, there's sufficient research done to actually say that we have to just move forward in terms of action. So thank you for the suggestions. I think also in terms of what Dr. Harris just said, in terms of the solutions, protection areas, in terms of safer avenues to report, to speak out, regular access of what our children and our youth are looking at, but also at the same time respecting adolescents and their environments. I think, as you have also pointed out, these are not easy issues, because it's about trust and relationships, about our children, amongst others, about you and me in the protocol, that we friendships now. Why would you, after we breaking up or friendships going sour, now do that to me? So it made me also think that the cyber environment or the cyber space is 24/7 available to all of us. And I think what we have learned and seen is that, these are through the digital media, this is where our social interactions take place in various corners and aspects. And we also know that we have the ability to affect and influence one another on those platforms. And thinking about protocols and guidelines, nobody teach anybody what is the protocol to use to go into the cyberspace. From very little childhood, the children start looking and staring, and people keep them busy, and they're paging as if they just know how to go forward. So just to emphasize the research focus, but I think as professionals, challenging, analyzing those policies and make sure what is not there that should be there for us to protect and to have a platform to speak out. And then also the advocating for the rights of people. It's sad to read in the newspapers when bullying and sexting and all of things have gone too far. So the proactiveness of us as professionals, but also the idea of using our peers. How can we use adolescents to help adolescents, that've been through those experiences? So thank you for challenging us to really move into action and to mobilize our youth on campus, our school children, our ECD facilities. As the university, we have got access to the community in terms of research, but also in terms of making a difference and being proactive and preventative. And the last thing I would really like to put to our two colleagues and our presenters also is to say, please put your work into public opinion pieces, and also want to challenge for the lower early childhood intervention groups is that work with UNICEF, perhaps to make picture books for people how to deal with cyberspaces. So thank you for really stimulating our ideas. This is an ongoing conversation. I don't think we must stop. We must really collectively find solutions forward, come back and say, what are we doing and how do we engaging our youth, everyone, because we are all involved in the cyberspace. Last word to thank Dr. Kutura Priscilla and Mrs. Remanunal and Mrs. Claessens for putting this together. And thank you for everyone who attended. This was really a worthwhile conversation, and I hope that we will continue the discussion forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Antoinette Lombard, and thank you for thanking us. It is indeed an ongoing conversation, and I hope that we can be able to have these conversations even with our family and friends, because some of us, maybe we are doing the cyberbullying without actually knowing. So let's continue to talk about it. As you can see, there is another poll, which is the last one for us to fill in. Please, may you vote again. The question is, did you find this webinar helpful and relevant? We want to know your views and opinions so that in future when we are planning for other webinars like this one. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you. We know that you have your busy schedules, but you managed to get time to actually come and have conversations with us. As you have seen in the chat as well, I think Elmin has shared the links to the full papers of the presentations that happened today. So thank you everyone, and may you please go on that poll and vote so that we can see. I can see that there is no response. Okay, the responses are coming now. So as we are concluding, thank you to all our presenters for presenting. Thank you, Mr. Malanga. Thank you, Dr. Harris. And I would like also to take this opportunity to thank my co-organizer, Ms. Rima Nanlau. Unfortunately, she's out now because of load shedding. They've been shedded there where she is since we have moved to stage 4. And thank you, Ms. Elmin Claessens, for the technical part. It's always difficult when you are hosting something online. So at least everything went well, everything was smooth today. So thank you everyone for participating. I think we have come to the end of our webinar. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.